Hi, my name is Stuart Lynch. In this video, I'd like to introduce you to some new features coming in Xcode 16 and how you might be able to take full advantage of them. I'm going to start with the predictive code completion that does require macOS 15 or Sequoia, but I'll then move on to changes that apply to Xcode whether you're running macOS 15 or the earlier macOS 14 Sonoma. I love getting your feedback, so if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment below. Make sure you ring the bell to enable notifications and get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. A link is in the description. WWDC 24 brought some interesting changes and additions to Xcode. As I was preparing for this video, I was wondering how to best introduce the changes and to show you what is possible once it's out of beta. The biggest feature, of course, is the introduction of some form of AI through Swift Assist and predictive code completion. Now, I'm running Xcode 16.0 Beta 2, as you see here. And as of this recording of this video, Swift Assist is not yet available. But predictive code completion is. But there is a caveat. You must be running macOS 15 in order to take advantage of the predictive code completion. I'm running macOS 15 Sequoia on this computer that I'm recording for this video, so I can show you that feature. I have some reservations about it, but it may still be early stages. Xcode 16 can be run on Sonoma macOS 14, but you'll not get the predictive code completion. So in order to show you a lot of the new features in Xcode 16 and to show you that code completion, I want to start by building a very simple application and show you how predictive code completion can be of some assistance to you, but can also likely slow you down. After that, I'll use the app that we built to introduce you to other new features of Xcode 16 that are available to you when you're still running macOS 14 Sonoma. So let's get started. As I said, this is going to be a simple application just to get a feel for predictive code completion. I just want to create a navigation view that'll display a list of people who have a name, an age, and a hobby, and when you tap on one of the names in the list, you'll be taken to a detail view where you'll be able to update the name. Now, if I type command comma, I'm taken to the Xcode settings screen. And then if you go to the text editing section, you'll see there that there's a check mark next to the predictive code completion. If you're not running macOS 15, this will be disabled. Now, I'm going to be entering all of my code in the content view for now, and then move it into other files later. And this will give me an opportunity to demonstrate some of the other new features of Xcode that I think you'll really like. First, let's create a struct called person, and that will be identifiable and will contain editable properties for name and age. So let me enter a comment that describes this below my current preview. I want a person struct that will be identifiable and contain properties for name and age. If I pause a bit, I'll get Xcode predicting what I want, and if I use the tab key, it will create those three properties for me. The problem is it created those properties as lets, and I want them to be vars. So be sure in your description to specify exactly what you want. So I'm going to remove the code and add the word editable, and then press return. And then we'll try it again. That's better, but I don't need the codable, but that's okay. I also want each person to have a hobby, so I want to create an enum that will have a number of cases for a hobby. So let me describe that as a comment. An enum representing a number of hobbies. Again, I'll wait for Xcode and press tab a few times, and it creates a hobby enum for me that is a string and its case iterable. It also generates some samples for me, so that's good. Well, next I want a computed property that will return an image or the string for an SF symbol representing the hobby. So another comment, a computed property that will return a string representing an SF symbol for each hobby. Code completion here creates a static property called symbol that is a string, and it offers a switch statement with 2 cases instead of all 5. So I can let Xcode generate the remaining cases. This has been the case for a while now. Then I'll use code completion to replace the placeholder with another suggested string for the SF symbol. It did a pretty good job even though I spelled SF symbol incorrectly. However, on further inspection, if I check out SF symbols in the library and check out those symbols that it generated and try to locate this one called utensils, it doesn't find it. It doesn't exist. So let me look for cooking. So I'm going to choose frying pan. So just be careful that you double check the work that it does. So let's add a new hobby property to our person struct, and it suggests that it wants an array. Now I only want one, so I'll just specify hobby, and it will know that I mean that enum type. Next, I want a static property that I can use for my view. So I'll add a comment for this. A static array of person called sample people. Well, it generates an array, but only one person in that array. However, if I just start to create a new person object in the array and pause a second, it'll generate another sample for me. And I can continue to do this to get as many as I want. Now I want to put this project under source control, so let me do that first in case I have to revert. So let's see if Xcode can help us out by creating a list view displaying that list of sample people. So I'm going to create a static property for people, and I'm going to assign to it the static sample people from the person struct. So let's see if a comment replacing the body content can help me out here. I want a list view displaying a person's hobby symbol, their name, and age. Well, Xcode suggests a list using a for each loop iterating over our people state variable, but all it offers me is an age stack. So your mileage may vary, but for me, I couldn't get it to understand my request here. So I'm going to start with an image, and it correctly suggests an image using the system name, but it incorrectly uses the person hobby case's raw value rather than the symbol property. So let me correct that. Now I know I want the name, so I can start with a text view, but it's suggesting putting the name and age together on a single line. I don't want that. So I'm going to use the person.name first. Then I'll follow that with person.age, and it suggests a string interpolation instead of a number format option, but that's okay. Now I'm going to separate those two at the spacer. Now if I just enter a period after any view, like this text view, Xcode will offer a suggestion for a view modifier, like a different font size. Well, I want to embed this in a navigation stack. And introduced last year in Xcode was the ability to select the block of text, and if you enter the left bracket, or a parentheses, or a square bracket, it will close the block off with the closing version. Now I want a brace here, as that's what I'll use in a navigation stack. So I'll do that, and then all I have to do is enter the string navigation stack. Now at the end of the list closing brace within this navigation stack, if I enter a period, it correctly guesses that I want a navigation title using the string people. Well, instead of each of the items in the list being just a static H stack, I want it to be a label for a navigation link, where the destination will take me to somewhere else, so perhaps I can edit the person's name. Well, I need to ignore the suggestion as I want to display the name followed by the symbol below it. I can see that styling is suggested. Well, I get a heading style, and it also suggests a navigation bar title. That heading's not good, so I'll choose large title, but I'll keep the bar title. Below that, I'll create an image using a system name of that person.hobby.symbol string. And I'll let Xcode suggest resizable and scale to fit. I'm not going to set a specific frame though. I'd rather use just some padding. I can test this now and it's looking okay, but I want to embed this in a VStack using that select and then the left brace trick. And then I'm going to push the content up to the top with a spacer. And then I want to change this iteration to be a bound iteration. So I'm going to make this a bindable people object. And then instead of using a text view, I'll use a text field bound to that person.name property. Well, this is better. But I can fix this up with some padding. And I can give the text view some styling by letting Xcode suggest a rounded border text field style. But we can do better than that just by using .rounded border. So you see, code prediction isn't exactly giving me the best code all the time. Well, I want to refactor this VStack into its own subview. So I can select it and choose that option from the context menu. I think Xcode used to have the extract view selected in the past, but not now. But I can select the text and then use Command Option E to select both occurrences, and then I can rename it Person Detail View. Of course, the subview has no idea what a person is, so we'll need a binding to that person object. And then we can pass in the person when we present the person detail view. Well, now that's all I want to cover regarding the predictive code completion in Xcode 16. It's still early days and there is some potential to save me some time, but I also think that it may get in the way of predicting things that I don't want. I also think that for less experienced developers, it may lead to some poor code choices. Only time will tell. I'll be really interested in Swift Assist when it arrives, so I'll do another video then. But I'm not finished with Xcode 16 yet. I'm going to move this project now over to my other computer that's still running macOS 14 Sonoma, which does not support predictive code completion, but the remaining things I want to cover do not require that. As you can see here, I've switched over. I'm running the same Xcode 16 beta, but I'm now on macOS Sonoma 14.5. So if I open Xcode settings again using Command, and go to the text editing tab, you can see that predictive code completion is not an option. Well, I have all of my code right here in content view now, and I want to separate out my models and subviews into their own files. But I've got a number of new options now that I think are really nice. Let me just select the person struct without the leading comment. And I'm just going to drag and drop it onto the navigation pane. And this will create a new file using the struct name. All I have to do is add the import of foundation. The problem is that I still have the other version left in content view, so I have to remove it. Another way to do this is to first cut out your content. So let me cut out the hobby enum. And then I can just click in the navigation pane and use Command V to paste it in there. And a new file is created using that enum name. Of course, I still have to import foundation, but I don't have to delete the old version because I had cut it out. So let's do the same with the person detail view. I'm going to cut it out, paste into the navigation pane. I can see the view's been named properly. But this time I need to import SwiftUI. And the application compiles without errors. Perfect. Now, if I return to the preview detail view, you'll notice that there is no preview, but I can always add my own. Now, preview will need to display the preview detail view, but it also requires a binding to a person object. And prior to Xcode 16, if we wanted to work with this binding in our view, we had to jump through quite a few hoops. What most people did was simply use a constant to a sample object, like I'm doing here. But this isn't optimal, because if we wanted to work with this binding, we'd have issues due to the constant nature of that object. It's immutable. Well, in Xcode 16, we have a new Reviewable Macro that lets me create a state property for the preview that can be used as a binding. So we use @Reviewable and then create our state property just as we would have up top. Returning to Content View, then you can choose to create a new file from the menu options, but things have changed here. We now have different choices. We can choose an empty file or a file from template. I seldom use those menus on top. I like context menus, so I can simply right-click in the navigator and I'll get the same choices. So if I choose New Empty File, it creates a new file with the file name selected so that I can just type to give it a name. But if I open it, I see it's a file with no imports at all, so you're free to do whatever you want here. I'm just going to delete it. Now, if you choose New File from Template, you'll get the same options as New File used to give you in previous versions of Xcode. Well, I'm a strong believer in grouping and organizing my files. And these two files here represent my models. So I'm going to select both of them and group them together. Now I have two choices. I can create a new folder from the selection or a new group. So let me choose folder for these two. And I'm going to call that folder models. These other two files are my views. So I'm going to select both of them and choose new group from selection. And this time I'll call it views. So other than the color difference, what is the difference between these two? If I were to view these files in the Finder, you'll see that both of them are indeed inside folders in the Finder. Okay, so what's the difference? Well, the first thing that you'll notice is that you can reorder files in a group. See how I can drag and drop to reorder my two views? The Models folder, on the other hand, is a folder and you can't rearrange files in folders. Well, what else? Well, on my desktop, I have a sample.swift file that I want to add to my project. Actually, it's an empty file, but that doesn't really matter. Let's pretend that it has some code in here that I want to use in my project. When I drag and place it in my models folder, I get two options for the selected target. I can either copy this file to that destination and leave the existing one there, or I can move it. So let's copy it. If I inspect in Finder again, you'll see that indeed that file is there, and the original is still left on my desktop. So let's add that desktop file to the Views group now. Well, this time there are three options. I can copy and move as before, but there's a third option called Reference Files in Place. Let me choose that option. Well, the file is added to my project. But if I inspect the Views group in Finder, you'll see that it's not there. It's simply a reference inside my project navigator. So if I deleted the file in Finder, you'll see that the file in our Views group in the navigator is now red, indicating a missing file. And if I check the inspector, we'll see that the file is pointing to a non-existing file on my desktop. And this is really important to know, particularly if you're sharing your projects with others. You can't have references to files. You must make sure that you have a copy or move the file over so that it's part of your project. You'll notice that the version that I had copied over to the models folder wasn't affected because it was a copy. And since I like to organize my files more, I like to use groups. So in Xcode 16, you can now easily convert a folder to a group and then once it's a group, I can drag and drop to reorganize. Now, if you check out Xcode Help and then go to the Managing Files and Folders section, you'll get more information. In particular, you might want to read about the benefits to using folders instead of groups, and this is particularly useful when working on larger projects. So those are some of the big changes this year in Xcode, but I thought that I'd point out a couple of others before finishing. One of them is, in fact, something from last year. Let me show you that one first. If I go to my hobby Enum, you'll notice that the switch statement, the cases are all in line with the switch, and I'd like those to be indented. So if I use Command comma to bring up the settings again and then go to Text Editing, Indentation tab, you'll see that you can select to indent switch case labels in Swift, as well as the pre-selected C, Objective-C, C++ code. So now I can simply select this code and reformat using the Control-I. Perfect. Now let me take a look at a new option. If I open Content View, let me dismiss the preview so that all I see is code. Let me also bring back the settings and go to the Text Editing tab. And you can see that there's a new entry here that is Reformat Code at Columns. And for me, it's set at 120. And that's that vertical line that you see on the right of my code. If I set it at, say, let me try 45, you'll notice that the vertical line goes through the second text view, but not through the first. Well, there's a menu option from the Editor Structure menu that is Format to Width. And I see that it is a Control-Option-I. So let me use the keyboard shortcut on that text view that goes over the line, and you'll see that it reformats to the width. And you can see that the text view is split over 3 lines. It extends past the vertical line only as far as necessary. So if I were entering this code from scratch, it would automatically reformat like this. If I try this on the first text view though, because it does not go past the line, nothing happens. So let me set it back to 120. Now I could, of course, reformat that text view if I wanted to using Control-M, which was a new addition last year that allows you to break up your code. And another thing I want to show you is on the settings again, and that's the Components tab. It used to be called Platforms, but as you see, it's now renamed to Components, and it's been reorganized a bit. This displays all of your installed platforms and simulators. Now, if you have multiple versions of iOS simulators for a specific iOS version, you can simply right-click to remove them. For example, do I really need to have multiple versions of an iOS 17 simulator? Each one's taking up disk space. Of course, if I wanted to install watchOS for development, I can do that here simply by tapping that Get button. And if I want to install multiple simulators that I may have deleted, I could tap the plus button below and select the one that I wanted. Now, the final thing I want to bring to your attention is app icons. If you watch the keynote or State of the Union, you'll know that you can now modify your iPhone's home screen with different placements and display a tinted icon for every app, or even different versions when in dark mode. Apple will do its best to convert your single icon that we've had since forever to work with to these 2 new features. But if you want to give your users the best of all experiences, you'll have to provide your own versions. So in the Assets folder for the app icon, you see that we now have placeholders for those 2 new versions that we can add. You can add a dark and tinted app icon for iOS in Xcode 16. Well, there are a number of other things under the hood that are changed in Xcode, and updates to instruments, testing, Swift 6 implementation, but I'll leave those for videos later on. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and enable notifications so that you're made aware of new videos that I release. And you can also download my free channel listing app to be able to search for and find content from any one of my over 300 Swift and SwiftUI related videos. Thanks for watching.